Hello and welcome back to another episode of Sermon Braindump. It's been a while. Been off for a couple of weeks, but it's good to be back with you. My name is Scott Dalen. I'm a pastor in Southwest Iowa for the ELCA in a congregation down here, and I present these videos every couple of weeks, normally every week, although it's been a few, for a couple different reasons. The first of which is just to take my brain out of the mode of background work through the course of the week and move into a process of actually writing and preparing a sermon that I will preach to my congregation for the weekend. So that's the first reason I do these, and the second is just to allow you, the viewer, who've come across this video for whatever reason has brought you here today, to gain some insight into the assigned text for the week. So that is why I do these. This particular Sunday, August 20th, 2017, the 11th Sunday after Pentecost, our assigned gospel text comes out of Matthew 15. There's the option of having verses 10 through 20 and then 21 through 28. Now, I am not doing the first part, which is 10 through 20. It's kind of an odd little passage where Jesus is just kind of talking about some different rules of interactions or after some interactions with the Pharisees, and he's talking about some of the different laws. And really about the only connection that it has with the rest of the passage is there's a part where Jesus is talking about dietary restrictions, and he says, don't you know that that which you take into your body passes out into the sewer? Essentially, what you eat turns into shit. Sorry, but that's pretty much what he says. And that's not what makes a person unclean, but what makes a person unclean is what comes out of their mouth. That reveals what's in their heart. Now, that could potentially and probably be a pretty strong connection into the rest of the text or the second part of the text, but in many ways, these two batches of verses, even though they're put right together in the narrative, are seemingly disconnected or disjointed. So I'm putting the first part out, and I'm just focusing on verses 21 through 28. Now, a little bit of background information on where this is at or what's going on in terms of overarching narrative. There's been some different things happening. Last week, no video, of course, but last week the gospel included Peter walking on water along with Jesus. Sort of, that's a very odd way of putting it, but that does happen. The disciples are out in the boat, and it's middle of the night, and they're straining against a storm, and Jesus comes walking out to them on the water, and Peter's like, hey, Lord, if that's you, tell me to come to you on the water, and Jesus says, come on, and so Peter does, and at first it's great, and then Peter sees everything he's up against, realizes what's going on, and freaks out, and sinks, and Jesus saves him. So that's been going on. That's been part of the passage, but so we're like approximately midway through the overarching narrative, just over halfway here in terms of where things are at. But regardless, Jesus has been active. There's been teaching. There's been miracles. There's been encounters with opponents that oppose him. Clearly, the Pharisees, that right there, so. I'm sorry if I got a weird look on my face. My video's getting a little pixelated. Hopefully that's not coming through in the actual video, but it just caught my attention there on my screen. So that's why a goofy look just went on my face. Anyway, Matthew 15, verses 21 through 28. Jesus left that place, namely being the region of Israel, although it may be like the northern part. It may be in Nazareth, honestly. I'm kind of blanking on where exactly he's at, but he's in like Jewish territory. He left that place and went away to the district of Tyre and Sidon. Just then a Canaanite woman from that region came out and started shouting, have mercy on me, Lord, son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon. But he did not answer her at all. And his disciples came and urged him, saying, send her away, for she keeps shouting after us. He answered, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. But she came and knelt before him, saying, Lord, help me. He answered, it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. She said, yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. Then Jesus answered her, woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish. And her daughter was healed instantly. All right, so pretty short little passage. There's a lot happening here that makes me uneasy. I've preached on this passage before. 3 years ago, I preached on this passage out of Matthew. 2 years ago, at some point, I also preached on the same or similar story out of Mark's gospel. There's differences between the two accounts, but it's the same story, and pretty much the same thing happens. But some different details that I kind of want to hit on. that I think all play into this. So we hear that Jesus goes to the region of Tyre and Sidon. So think of where Israel's at, right along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea and going into the Jordan River. Tyre and Sidon are two seaport cities that are farther north. Not way farther north, but they're farther north. So they're outside of the territory of Israel, if we want to call it that. Something important to remember going clear back in their history, that when the Israelites came into the Promised Land, they never spread as far as Tyre and Sidon. That's just regions that they were not able to conquer back in the time of the kings, and even under the by the time we get to Solomon, and Solomon held the largest portion in terms of the United Kingdom of Israel. They did not conquer Tyre and Sidon, so that was a little bit of a tension that might have been there, and there was always a lot of back and forth between the two. The residents of that area were opponents. Now, I'm not positive if that's where the Canaanites might have lived at one point, and the woman is called a Canaanite here. Interestingly enough, by the first century, when Jesus was around, there weren't Canaanites around anymore. Their descendants were around, but there weren't Canaanites anymore. Canaan as a kingdom or as a culture or whatever had been wiped out. But if you think of Canaanites, Cain, shorten it up, as in Cain and Abel, going all the way back to Adam and Eve's kids. Cursed is Cain because he murdered Abel. His descendants are probably considered the same way. The Canaanites were long the opponents of the Israelites. Think back to to David when he was a boy, and David and Goliath. Well, Goliath was a Canaanite. So we've got a lot of different things that are really pointing at the indication that Jesus is in, if not enemy territory, he's in Gentile territory. He's outside of the sphere of influence of Israel. And yes, granted, side note, Israel is controlled by Rome at this time. So there is that. They're not an autonomous nation, but he's outside of his home territory, and he's outside of his home cultural influence, if we want to say that. And I think that's what the author of the gospel is really pointing at, indicating where he's at, indicating the cultural barriers that Jesus is crossing or has crossed. And now it's interesting that she's called a Canaanite. Honestly, I'm not quite sure why the author of Matthew chooses to do that. In Mark, she's called a Syrophoenician and a Greek, which at that time would have been probably a much more accurate cultural descriptor or cultural identifier, if we want to use that word. Canaanite's weird. Like I said, there weren't Canaanites around anymore. So why does the author of the gospel do this? Call her this? I don't know, other than to probably indicate, like, because Matthew's Jewish audience would have heard Canaanite and been like, oh, we don't like them. Maybe consider what I've talked about before, if you've seen it in John's gospel with Samaritans, that Samaritans and Jewish people didn't play nice. Well, if Jewish people were listening to Matthew's gospel and they hear Canaanite, they're going to think, oh, we don't like them. Okay. That's my thought. Okay. And that's kind of it. So I'm going to keep going here. All right. So she comes out. Her issue is that her daughter has a demon, and we don't know if her daughter is with her or not. We actually kind of think that not, based on Mark's account, but that she comes out. She recognizes Jesus for who he is. Now, she says some interesting things here. She calls him Lord 3 times. She calls him Son of David, which is an indicator of recognizing that connection back to David and all of the prophecies about the Messiah being of the line of David. We also think back to some of Jesus' own genealogy, which is listed out in Matthew's gospel at the very beginning. There are 3 Canaanite women who are part of it. And so maybe this is an indicator of, like, hey, we are connected, whether you realize it or not, or whether you want to recognize it or not. We have a connection. Our cultural heritage is not that far apart. I don't know. And I'm doing a lot of speculating here. I just kind of am. And I see I'm coming up on the 10-minute mark already, so I really need to get with this. But so she's hoping for Jesus to perform an exorcism for her to help her daughter. Have mercy on me, for my daughter has a demon. She's suffering from the demon, but our whole family is. I am as well. So and this is a troubling passage. I think, long story, as I've been kind of rattling around in a circle here for a bit, that's where this is going. This passage is troubling because of the way that Jesus reacts. Jesus has had interactions across cultural boundaries already in Matthew's gospel. We see that throughout the gospels. We hear it at the very end that Jesus tells his disciples that you will be my messengers in the Great Commission. He says, "Go make disciples of all nations," not just staying within the Jewish nation or the house of Israel, as we hear here. But so she comes and she's looking for that healing. Word of Jesus has spread. Knowledge of what he can accomplish and can do has spread. Miracles, the stories of the miracles have spread. People know. Clearly, she comes out looking for a miracle. She's hoping for a miracle. And everything that we've seen up to this point has indicated that there should be no reason that he would say no. There would be no reason that he would hesitate. But he does. First asks, he says nothing. Then we hear that the disciples show up. We hear the disciples came. I find myself wondering, where were they at? Were they separated? Were they on the other side of the group? Were they somewhere in town and they found him? We don't know. There seems to be something of a tiny separation that we're given just a hint at. The disciples came, and it's at that point that Jesus starts talking. Now, there's some confusion and some ambiguity within the original language when the disciples say, "Send her away, for she's crying out after us." It's release her, is probably a little better translation. And that could mean kind of one of two things. It could mean like, send her away because she's annoying us. Or it could be release her, like, from what hinders her, like give her what she's asking for. We don't know. There's ambiguity there. But then Jesus lays out well, I came only for the lost sheep of Israel. And she comes at him again. "Lord, have mercy on me." And then this most troubling thing, the thing that I just have a real hard time with, is this message that he says that it's not fair to take the food of the children and throw it to the dogs. He's basically calling her a dog. Maybe there's something in the context of the first century relations that I'm unaware of. That's certainly possible. Different commentaries that I've read, different things that I've read, different conversations that I've had have tried to come at this passage from a lot of different directions, saying, well, maybe he's making a joke and she's in on it and she's just jumping into it. Maybe so. Maybe some have suggested that Jesus needs to learn something here in his ministry, that in this he's realizing that his mission is bigger than just Israel. Those are just a couple of examples, but for me, they're inadequate. There may be merit to those, and I'm not discounting them, but for me today, they don't cut it. And I think it's because the woman is treated as less than human, seemingly, at face value, from what we can read in the narrative, not being there, not seeing it, not being able to hear the inflection in their voices and see how they're interacting with one another. All we can do is read it, and at face value, it seems that our Lord, our Savior, is treating this woman as less than human. And man, that gives me pause, especially in light of recent events here in North America or in the United States. Last weekend, we had white supremacy and flat-out Nazis at a rally in Virginia, and someone died. Now, I'm not going to get into who's to blame, who's not to blame, because in my opinion, that's a load of shit. We had hate groups in this country in 2017 rallying around hate. And the only thing that I can ever think of in that, and the thing that I fail to grasp, is how can anyone look at someone else and not see human, not see a person of worth? And that's what hate is all about. That's what white supremacy is all about. That's what, whatever you want to call it, racism, whatever it is, it's to see a person and not see a beloved child of God, to see a person and to not see a individual of worth, to excuse me, to see them as less than human. And that just burns me. And maybe, just maybe, that's why I'm so sensitive to this particular passage this week or this time around. But I don't think so, because as I said earlier, I've run into this passage or this story before a couple of different times and found it troubling as well. Many different things that I read say that this is one of the most troubling passages in the New Testament because Jesus looks so bad in it. Now, in a conversation with some fellow pastors this week, the idea came up that keep in mind that Jesus doesn't speak until the disciples show up, and I made that point earlier. So is he doing this for their, I don't want to use the word benefit, but I don't know what, is he doing this for their benefit? Is this because of them? Is this holding up a mirror to their cultural bias? That this woman is a foreigner, she's not worthy of the Messiah, she's not worthy of God's love. Is that what he's doing? Maybe. Again, I don't like it, but perhaps that's what's happening. Now, is there any indication in the earlier part of the gospel that the disciples need that? Not really, but maybe. But maybe we just need to be okay with the idea that he's holding up a mirror to us today. We may not like it. Maybe we see the worst of ourselves in it. I know personally, I read this and I think of every time that I have failed to show mercy, that I have failed to show love or acceptance, or to treat someone as human. And yeah, I'm guilty of it. I know I am. I'll own that. Maybe that's why I find this so troubling, but regardless, it's timely. And where I'm going with the sermon, and this is a full preview for any of you out there who might be sitting in the pew on Sunday, that it's troublesome when we see someone treated as less than human. And if you've ever had an experience where you've been treated as less than human, you know what that's about. Now, I say that and I look at my own picture in the computer screen here, and I know I'm a straight white male in the U.S. I've got very, very, very little to complain about. I just kind of don't. I've got that white privilege thing going on, whether I want to admit it or not, but I do. And yet there's been times in my life where I've been treated as less than human. I know it's nothing compared with what other individuals and cultural groups and different people will experience. So I own that, but I've had a moment. That doesn't excuse anything else. I'm just saying I've been treated as less than human before, in a very small way, and I remember what that felt like. And so how can we as a culture, how can we as a church, how can we address that in our country and address the sin that is supremacy, that is racism, the sin that is looking at another person and not seeing an individual who also bears the divine image of God. I don't know how I'm going to put this sermon together. I'm still working on that in my head, and I've rambled for quite a long time on this. Troublesome passage, but timely in the way that is worked, considering what's been going on. So if you have thoughts, questions, comments, by all means, throw those down in the comment section. We will continue the conversation that way. Otherwise, I hope you have a blessed week, and we will catch you next time.